Hello. This lecture is going to be the first in a short series of lectures on the life and teachings of the Buddha. And so we're going to get started today with his birth up to the point of the great going forth. So let us begin with where all of this started. You'll notice that I am here in Kathmandu, in the top of the world in Nepal. And this is where the story really gets started. It's in current day, present day Nepal that the Buddha was born. Of course, when he was born, his name wasn't the Buddha. His name was Siddhartha Gautama. And he was born here. And you can see Nepal is currently here in the northeast section, or northeast of the country of India. And this is where he was born. His father was a prince, and he was from that caste, the warrior noble caste. And this is a context which is taking place within Hinduism and the caste system. And we don't know exactly his dates, but he was living around the 5th century BCE. So 2,500 years ago is when this man, Siddhartha Gautama, was alive and living and teaching in Nepal and in what is now Nepal and India. Okay. So how does the story start? Well, the story starts with his mother, Queen Maya, who has a dream that a white elephant enters into her side one night and she becomes pregnant. And so she has this miraculous conception story. And as she's going through her pregnancy, everything's going very well. She has a very, healthy pregnancy, and it's said that she could even see the baby forming within her womb. And so eventually there came the time for her to deliver the baby. And so she was traveling at that time back to her hometown so she could give birth back where she was originally from. But while she's journeying, she goes into labor. And so the caravan stops alongside a grove of trees, and she enters into the grove of trees to give birth. Trees play a very important part of the story. You'll see that they keep coming up throughout the story. And so she takes hold of a branch and begins to go into labor there and to give birth, holding onto the branch of a tree. So not lying down in a common way, but in an unusual way. And as she then gives birth with virtually no pain, she then has a baby who is truly remarkable. And so this baby is fully conscious and can even stand and walk immediately upon being born. There's a depiction of this that I'd like to share with you from the movie Little Buddha. And so we're going to take a quick look at just a minute or so of this.
The child was born with almost no pain, with shining golden skin. He was fully conscious, his eyes wide open, and he was strong enough to stand on his own legs.
I have been born to reach enlightenment and free all creatures from suffering.
And it is said, lotus blossoms grew in his footsteps.
Okay, so this is the story of the birth of Siddhartha Gautama. And you can see there's a few things that are a little bit unusual about that story. One, if you were to draw upon that movie depiction alone, that was a pretty big baby. And I don't know if any of you have ever been at the birth of a child, but newborns are usually not that big. And newborns are usually not born without pain. And I would think especially a newborn that big would not be born without pain. And so you can see that the story is of a miraculous birth in some respects, a miraculous baby. And so I don't know how clearly that came through in the video, but baby Siddhartha announces that he is going to attain enlightenment. This will be his final lifetime on the cycle of reincarnation, and he will bring enlightenment and teachings and overcome suffering for other people as well. And so you have this remarkable story of little baby Siddhartha who's born. Now, he's not enlightened, right? He's just a child, but a remarkable child. Unfortunately, Siddhartha's mother passed away when he was only a week old, and so he was raised by his father. And when he was still very young, there were Vedic priests who came from the mountains to see this child. And when they came, they examined the child and the marks on his body, and they determined that this was truly a remarkable child, and he was destined for one of two paths in life. The first path would be he would be a great king, a Chakravartin, a king of kings, like a great emperor and leader. So that was one path that he might go down, and the other path was that he would become a great religious teacher. And so those were the two paths that this child might go down. So the father, a prince himself and of the warrior noble caste, clearly wants his son to be a great king of kings. And so what he's told is, if your son experiences the sufferings of the world, then he's going to make the decision to go down the religious path. And so his father decides to protect Siddhartha from the unpleasantness of the world, from the suffering of the world. And so he shelters him in the palace. He actually has 3 palaces, and he can move palace to palace depending on the season. So he's in the most pleasant one at all times. And he's only surrounded by people who are young and healthy and beautiful. And when he travels from palace to palace, his father makes sure that the road is cleared of anything unpleasant. And so he never sees anything bad about the world. He doesn't see the realities of the world with all of its pain and suffering. And so he lives this very sheltered life. And he grows up, and he gets into his 20s, and he takes a wife, and he even has a kid. And the time that he has his wife becomes pregnant is around the time that a bunch of other interesting things start playing out. So this is the story at this point, right? So we have the miraculous birth story, and then we have him living this life of protection and comfort and obliviousness to the realities of the world. But something goes wrong with his father's plan. And what ends up happening is he sneaks out or goes off the path that his father has chosen for him, and he encounters the realities of the world. And there's a very famous experience that he has. And this is known as the 4 passing sights. So I'm going to jot these down for you. Okay. So we have these very famous 4 passing sights. Okay, and so the first thing that he sees after he gets out of the palace and gets off the road that's been cleared for him, the first thing that he sees is an old man. And he's never seen old age before, and so he's never seen someone at the end of their life. And so he has this surprise reaction to this old man that he comes across, and he doesn't even know what he's really looking at. And his servant is still with him at this time. And so he asks his servant, what is this? Who is this guy? What's wrong with him? And his servant explains, this is an old man. This is a man who is nearing the end of his life. And this is what old people look like. And he explains to Siddhartha that everyone grows old. Unless they die early, this is the path that all of us are on to old age. And so this has a very shocking effect on Siddhartha, who, remember, is in his 20s at this point. And so the first passing sight is the old man, which has a profound effect on him. The second of the passing sights is a sick man. And so he comes across someone who has a very severe sickness, right? Someone suffering from some sort of illness, and he's never encountered this. And he asks, what's wrong with this person? What's wrong with this man? Why is he moaning? Why is he in pain? And so his servant again explains, this is sickness, and sickness comes upon all people. Sooner or later, we all fall sick. And so this is also something that really profoundly affects him and is disturbing for young Siddhartha. The third passing sight then is keep it consistent, a dead man, or if you prefer, it's a corpse, right? He comes across a dead body. This is someone who has recently died and is on the way to the funeral pyre, right? Because the Hindus typically burn the bodies of the dead. And so he sees this, this dead body, and he's never seen this before. And so likewise with the previous two, he asks his servant, what is this? And he has explained to him that this is death, and this is the destiny of all people, even kings, even princes. All people ultimately die. And Siddhartha is shocked and dismayed and by all of this. The fourth passing sight that he sees is a sadhu, or if you prefer, a sannyasin. This is a wandering holy man. And in Hinduism, you have people who dedicate their lives to the religious path. And so he comes across someone whose life is not about pleasure, and is not about family, and is not about normal things that people concern themselves with in this world, but this is a person in pursuit of enlightenment. This is a person in pursuit of a religious goal, and he's never come across this sort of thing. And so likewise, this also has a very profound impact on him. And so these are the four passing sights. And when after he has this profound experience, he goes back to his father and tells him, why could you keep all of this from me? I haven't seen the real world. And his father is trying to protect him and so on and so forth. But eventually what ends up happening is he decides that he can't stay. He can't stay in his life of luxury. He can't stay in the palace. And so one night when everyone's fallen asleep, he gets up and he takes his servant with him, and he gets on a horse, and they leave, they escape, and they ride off away from his father's palace. He goes out into the world, and this is known as the Great Going Forth. And so this is the beginning then of the spiritual journey of the Buddha, of the man who will become the Buddha. And so this is the story. And so after he rides for a while, he gets off his horse, and he takes out his sword, and he cuts off his hair. His long hair is a symbol of his royal heritage, and he trades clothes with this poor man, a beggar or a huntsman, and he begins his religious path and journey. So we're going to talk about the religious journey later in another lecture, but I want to return to something in this lecture that we've already talked about, which might seem kind of strange to you, but I think it's actually really quite interesting. If you look at the story of the Buddha and you look at his birth, on the one hand, we have the birth of a super baby, right? You have this baby who's born and immediately is conscious and can speak and can walk, and lotus flowers are blooming, and he pronounces that this will be his final lifetime and he will attain enlightenment, he will release others from suffering. And so you have this remarkable super baby. And then a couple decades later, he's in his 20s, and he just seems stupid. He just seems so hopelessly naive. What is sickness? What is death? And we understand he's lived a sheltered life, but you're an adult. You have to have figured some of this stuff out. And so he just seems so horribly oblivious that these stories seem at odds with each other, and they seem to just be kind of silly. And I think that was my reaction to them at first when I first came upon them. But the more I spent time thinking about them and reading others' discussions of them, I realized that there's actually a lot of wisdom and insight in these stories of the early life of the Buddha. So one of the things that Buddhists are always dealing with is that Siddhartha Gautama, the man who becomes the Buddha, on one hand is truly remarkable. He's one in a billion, right? Very rarely does someone come and do what Siddhartha did to become the Buddha in this way, to become fully enlightened. And so he's really unusual, really remarkable. And this took many, many lifetimes of building up the right karmic effect to be born as Siddhartha Gautama and attain enlightenment. So on the one hand, he's different, he's truly remarkable. And so you get that in the conception and birth story, right? That's how you depict in the story. He's a rarity, right? This is not a normal person. But at the same time, Buddhists want to say, on the one hand, yes, he's truly remarkable, but on the other hand, he's just like us. He's a human being. Now, some of this is going to change later, but for the most part in the original stories, yeah, I mean, Siddhartha Gautama is a human being who's just like us, and we want to communicate the idea that the path that he took is a path that's available to all of us, and what he learned and a possibility of enlightenment that presented itself to him also presents itself to us. And we even have the benefit of hearing his teachings and his experiences and wisdom. So we get this then in the story of the four passing sights. But you still might think, really, I mean, yeah, okay, he's like us and sometimes he's a little oblivious, but this guy seemed really oblivious. But the more I think about this story, I think it's got something really pretty profound to say, and especially to us in our generations, right? In these, the last century or so. So whether you're older or younger right now, I think for our generations, it's got something pretty impactful to say. And so what I want to talk about is I want to go back and consider these four passing sights in a little more depth. And I want to share some pictures to give a little more perspective on what we're talking about. So the first thing that Siddhartha sees is an old man. And he doesn't just see an old guy, the way that when you go to the mall and you see some guy walking around and you're like, there's an old guy, right? He sees someone who is ravaged by the years of his life, a man who probably has no more teeth left in his mouth, a man whose body is becoming weak and frail and is probably racked with pain from arthritis and other issues. His mind is probably slipping. And this is a profound experience. Right? This is not just he comes across an old guy and he's like, hey, what's old age? This is something that has an impact on it. And if you think about, for us, the times that we encounter old age, and we encounter old age in its real stark brutality in some ways, right? We run into people sometimes who are old, but we don't really face the encountering the horrors that some people face with old age. And so we usually put that somewhere aside. But sometimes you do get exposed to this. Sometimes we go and you visit a nursing home or a facility that takes care of the aged. And there have been times that I've gone into places like this to visit the friends of the family, friends of our family, and you see someone there who has begun to lose their mind and their physical capabilities. And we don't like these places. They make us uncomfortable very often, and they don't smell good, because when you're old and your body starts decaying and you lose control of your faculties and you lose control of your body, then things can get unpleasant. And we don't like to be in these places because we also realize this is my destiny. This is potentially where I'm going to end up. There's nothing to say that in my life I won't end up in a place like this, sitting there without the control of my body and mind that I have currently. And that can be a very difficult thing to face when we face our mortality in this respect. And so when you go into these places, right, where you encounter people who are really at the end of their lives and not doing well, it's not only unpleasant to see, but it also raises certain existential questions. And so we have that with Siddhartha encountering old age in a very direct way. And similarly, right, this is I went with this picture because I think it captures more what we experience when we go into a hospital and we see someone who may have been in an accident in this case, or maybe someone who has some disease and is being kept alive. And when we go in and we find people in the hospital who are suffering from some sickness, again, we don't like to encounter this. So it's not that Siddhartha comes across someone who's got a cold and he doesn't know why this person keeps blowing their nose. He comes across someone who is debilitated by some illness. And we don't like this. We don't like to look at it. And not only do we not like to look at it because it pains us to see others in this condition, but then we also realize, yeah, this could be me. At any point in time in my life, I could end up being in this hospital in a similar situation. This is a reality that all of us have to face. And again, this existential experience that we encounter sometimes in a hospital or someplace where you can find someone who is really suffering from some medical condition can have a very profound impact on us. We all know what sickness is. We all know what cancer is. But to encounter another human being face to face with that and to realize that could potentially be me at any point in time, that's also a very powerful experience. And then we have the dead man that Siddhartha comes across. Now, this is obviously a photograph, a color photograph, so it's more recent, but this would have been fairly close to what Siddhartha might have seen, right? Here you have, presumably in India, certainly a Hindu context, where you have a body being burned at the funeral pyre. And again, we all know what death is, so to ask what is death might seem silly. But when we encounter death, when you go to a funeral and you look in that casket and you see someone who once was alive and now they no longer are, and it again is a very powerful experience, especially when you ask yourself, when is this going to happen to me? And when you confront the fact that this is my destiny, this is everyone's destiny. So when Siddhartha asks, what is old age? What is sickness? What is death? We can look at it as a silly story about a guy who's oblivious. But I think what you really have is a person who encounters these things, these very unpleasant, real things, encounters them very directly, experiences them very profoundly, and has this existential crisis. What is life about? What is this journey that we're on? This is the destiny of all of us. Why is there pain? Why is there suffering? Why is there death? And so he finds that the life of comfort that he's been living is an illusion, right? And it's only distracting him from what is truly important and real in life. And so what happens is he finds out that there are people out there who pursue a different path, who are trying to find meaning and enlightenment and to overcome suffering in this world and to overcome the cycle of reincarnation, of birth and life and death and rebirth and so on in a world of suffering. And so he finds this experience pretty life-changing and leads to this event that we call the Great Going Forth. So this is where we find ourselves with the story of the Buddha, right? We have his remarkable birth story in what is today Nepal. We have him living a life of luxury with everything he could ever possibly want. But then when he faces the realities of the world and he has the 4 passing sights, then he decides, yes, I need to do something different, because the life of luxury is not sufficient. That is not what life is about. There must be something more profound. There must be the overcoming of this suffering and this death and reincarnation. And so he's going to go out on a religious path. And we'll pick up with that in the next lecture and find out where he goes, what he tries, and what he discovers. So stay tuned and take care of yourself and be safe.